To talk about the trade agenda this afternoon, and I appreciate the words of my colleague from Alaska regarding liquefied natural gas exports and oil exports. This is a discussion about how we ensure that we are accessing the 95% of consumers who live outside of our borders. And for the workers and farmers I represent in Ohio, that's really important. This is how we're going to be able to get this economy back on track, in part, is to provide more markets, more customers. And already in my state of Ohio, we depend heavily on exports. 1 out of every 3 acres is planted in Ohio, and we're one of the top farm states in the country. We're proud of that. It's our #1 industry. 1 out of every 3 acres planted is exported. Our soybean crop, which is typically our biggest crop in Ohio, 60% gets exported. So for farmers, in order to keep their prices up, these foreign markets are absolutely critical. But it's also really important for our manufacturing sector in Ohio. About 25% of our manufacturing jobs are export jobs. And frankly, what's happened over the last 7 years, while America has not been in the business of opening up these markets, they're beginning to lose their market share. So it's good for us to expand exports. We've got to do that because that creates not only more jobs in my state and in our country, but it also creates better jobs. These are high-payer jobs with better benefits. Those 95% of consumers outside of the United States border, they deserve to get some products made in America because they're great products. It's great agricultural products. It's great manufacturing products, great services. We should be aggressively expanding our exports. But while we do that, colleagues, we've got to be sure it's fair, too. We've got to be sure that these other countries are not sending us imports that are traded at below their costs. That's called dumping. That they aren't illegally subsidizing their exports, which happens. That's when you put countervailing duties in place. Make sure that they're not doing things to make the playing field unlevel so that our workers who are doing all the right things, playing by the rules, becoming more competitive, making concessions to be competitive, that they're not left holding the bag, that they don't get the short end of the stick, but instead they get the ability to compete on a level playing field. If they can do that, they'll be just fine. We will be able to expand exports, therefore create these better paying jobs we talked about. And that's what this debate should be all about. It's about a balance. It's about expanding export at the same time, making sure that the rules of the road work for all of us, including our workers and our farmers, our service providers in my state of Ohio and all around our great country. I'm delighted to see that we're moving forward with this debate because it's an honest debate we have to have. And for those that just say, well, we can expand exports, but we can't do anything about this unfair trade, I think that's not the right balance. For those who say we shouldn't be doing these exports because somehow that doesn't help our workers because there's so much unfair trade out there, that doesn't work either. There's a balance in between here. One of the issues that I've spent a lot of time working on over the years and looking at is this trade distortion called currency manipulation. And look, I understand it's a complicated area and some people think we just shouldn't touch it, or maybe it's something that only the Department of the Treasury can deal with because it's currency, it's not technically products and goods. But I would say that there is not a member in this body who doesn't believe that when another country manipulates its currency to expand its exports, that affects trade. It's just obvious. I mean, if you're trying in a deliberate way to lower the cost of your exports by lowering the value of your currency vis-a-vis another country like us, that's going to help you in trade. I had the fasteners in here this week. These are the people that make nuts and bolts and screws, and they're big in Ohio, and we're happy to have a good fastener industry in Ohio. But they will tell you their margins are pretty tight. Chairman Volcker was chairman of the Federal Reserve. He's made the interesting statement. He said that in 1 week, through currency manipulation, you can do away with all of the benefits of years of trade negotiations. And sadly, I think that's true. So we should, while we're promoting exports, also make it clear that we do not believe that we should distort trade. And for my Republican colleagues, those of us who believe in markets, we should be against distortions. And this is a market distortion. And we should speak up about it and not be shy about it, and not suggest that somehow because it's something that traditionally has been handled by the Treasury Department and by the International Monetary Fund and as a currency issue that it doesn't affect trade. It does affect trade. Now, if they were making great progress on it at the International Monetary Fund, I might feel differently about it. But why not include it as a trade negotiating objective? I think it makes all the sense in the world, and we're going to have an amendment to do just that that'll be on the floor next week as we take up the Trade Promotion Authority. I would urge my colleagues to take a look at it objectively. It's very targeted. It does not deal with the country being able to adjust its monetary policy. In fact, it explicitly says this does not relate to monetary policy, macroeconomic policy. It has to do with deliberate intervention in currency markets to have this benefit in exports we talked about, to again distort the free market in order for other countries to be able to sell their products to us at a lower value than they should be, and in turn for our exports to them to be at a higher value, which makes it harder for us to keep jobs here in America. So people say this is all about the auto industry. Yeah, the auto workers care about it, and they should. So do the auto companies. But so do the fastener companies. So do the steel companies. So do anybody, any groups in Ohio that are concerned about ensuring they get a level playing field for their exports, because currency manipulation doesn't help anybody. Now, people say, well, why are you doing this now? Because these countries like Japan are not currently manipulating their currency. I agree. Since probably the end of 2011, 2012, Japan stopped manipulation of their currency. They would not fall under this criteria we've laid out, but they've done it over 300 times in the past. And so all we're saying is, isn't it right, as we're negotiating an agreement, that we put in place some kind of discipline here to say, you know, we don't want you to do this in the future because it's not fair for you and for us. Trade ought to be about balance, not just the balance of expanding exports, but also having enforcement measures in place to level that playing field I talked about, but balance in the sense that we sell something to you, we get some money from doing that, we then use that money to buy something from the other place. So you have a balance in terms of trade. You don't have these huge surpluses you see in countries like China, for instance, where they have manipulated their currency. And so I hope that this issue will be one that we can address in an objective manner. Take the politics out of it, and let's decide what's best for the workers and farmers we represent and for the overall health of our economy. Because if we're going to get back into the business of trade, which I think we should be expanding trade by doing good agreements that knock down the barriers to us so that it is fair. If we do that, let's be sure that we can build a consensus for that among the American people who get it. They understand that we need to have exports, but they also understand that we need to have more fairness. There are other issues as well that we're going to address in this United States Senate in the Trade Promotion Authority vote next week. I hope some of them will be issues that we actually voted on today in the customs bill. Some of you followed this closely, but in the customs bill, there were a number of enforcement measures, not just on currency, but also on this issue of how do you show when you're injured as an American company if there is unfair trade. If another country sells something over here at below its cost, meaning they dump it here, or if they subsidize something illegally, how do you show as an American company that you've been injured by it in order to get the relief that you and the workers you represent deserve? Right now, it is very difficult sometimes to show injury to the point that some companies tell me, Rob, by the time we were able to go through this process and show that we were injured, it was too late. We had lost too much market share. We weren't able to get back on our feet. So there's a very simple provision. It's a Brown-Portman amendment that was included in the customs bill. We voted on it today. I would urge my colleagues to help us get that provision into the TPA bill as well, because we know that the customs bill may or may not make it through the process. We believe that the Trade Promotion Authority bill is much more likely to make it through the process to the President's desk for signature. I sure hope we have that provision in there. I asked my own leadership to include it in the substitute that was filed apparently today. I don't know if it's in there. I'm told it probably is not. I'm sorry to hear that, because it was one that we seemed to have a bipartisan consensus on in committee. And I thank Senator Hatch and Senator Wyden because they included it in the committee mark on the customs bill. We didn't have a vote as an amendment because they included it in the mark, because they thought it was good policy. And yet somehow in the substitute, I understand it may not be in there. I hope it is, but if it's not, we intend to offer an amendment to have it included. And I hope my colleagues will support that, because again, if you're talking about trade in a state like Ohio, we've got a lot of manufacturing, you've got to be sure to be able to look workers in the eye and say, this is going to be fair for you. Get in this business of trade, because we want to access those 95% of consumers outside of our borders. But we're going to help you. If somebody unfairly competes with you by dumping their product or illegally subsidizing their product, you know what? We're going to be there for you. We're going to be able to level that playing field by adding tariffs to their products, because it's illegal what they're doing. I've been active on this issue back home, not just on the material injury standard, which is what this is about when you get injured in trade, but also on this issue of being sure that we are opening up more markets for all of our Ohio products. Ohio manufacturers right now in rebar, hot-rolled steel, tires, uncoated paper, they're all involved in trade cases like this, all of them. And they all want to know this is going to be fair. Wheatland Tube is one of the nation's largest producers of steel pipe and tube products, and they've got 4 facilities in Ohio, one in Warren, one in Niles, one in Cambridge, one in Brookfield. They make products ranging from steel products for the energy industry, pipe for hydraulic fracking and so on, construction industry. They've been particularly impacted by a number of these trade enforcement cases, including several crucial cases we won last year on pipe and tube from China. We've had some nice victories for them. In fact, given the concerns that they have, I understand the plant in Warren, Ohio, which has 178 workers, probably would not be in existence today if we had not won these trade enforcement measures. So here's a plant, 174 people in Warren, Ohio, who would not have a job today if not for us standing up for them and saying, we're going to help you when there's an unfair import coming into this country. The workers there understand this issue. They get it, because they know it has a direct impact on their jobs. Let me read you an email I received this week from Mike Mack. Mike's a maintenance foreman at Wheatland Tube in Warren, Ohio. And this is what he said, and I quote, "As an individual employed in manufacturing, I understand better than most that trade is a key component for economic growth. However, it's important for U.S. manufacturers, steel and pipe and tube producers included, to have the tools to challenge unfair trade. I support the adoption of enforcement provisions that will close loopholes in the trade laws to ensure that companies can access these laws to challenge trade distorting practices." I continue with his quote, "I also support language in the TPA that prevents currency manipulation and the dumping of foreign products in the United States. It's essential that provisions to close loopholes in trade laws are included in a final trade bill," he says. "After all, there's a huge difference between fair trade and free trade." He says his company relies on these laws and has utilized them in recent years to challenge trade distorting practices that have injured our industry and our employees. Without laws to regulate unfair trade, he says, I know my job and thousands of other manufacturing workers' jobs are at risk. End quote. I think that email says it well. He didn't say he's against trade. He didn't say he's against exports. In fact, he said trade is a key component for economic growth. He supports it. He just wants to know that there's going to be a balance. And if there's a balance, Mike will stand up and support trade. But if there's not, he understandably is worried about his job and the jobs of his colleagues at that company and at companies all over my state. Folks, I really hope that as we promote trade, and we should, that we do so in a more balanced way. And if we do that, I think we're going to build a broader consensus for doing exactly what we should be doing, re-engaging in the world, expanding markets, knocking down barriers to trade, tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers alike. As some of you know, I was the U.S. Trade Representative for a while. I had that great honor to be able to travel all around the world representing our great country. Other countries are looking to us to be able to knock down these barriers to trade because they're unfair, because they know that it helps the economy in their countries. Developing countries know in their hearts that higher tariffs and non-tariff barriers between countries makes it harder to grow a middle class, to be able to bring people out of poverty. And they depend on us for that, but they also depend on us to ensure that the rules of the road are fair. It affects us. It affects this plant in Warren, Ohio. It also affects them. They suffer from currency manipulation too. Now, they suffer from unfairly traded imports too. Frankly, they're not always strong enough or big enough countries to be able to stand up to it. America's role in the world is truly exceptional. It is truly essential we're out there. And it's true in a whole broad range of issues, from human rights and fighting terrorism and keeping the Straits of Hormuz and the South China Sea open and so on. But it's also important on trade. And this is an opportunity for us to stand up here in this chamber and say, yeah, we're going to get back in the business of expanding trade, but we're going to do it in a balanced way. Finally, Madam President, let me mention a specific issue that's part of the trade legislation coming to the floor. This is about something beyond exporting American products. It's about exporting American values and the rule of law. As I said, countries are looking for us in part to let people know what the rules of the road ought to be. One of those rules of the road ought to be that we believe that human trafficking ought to be stopped, whether it's in our country or in other shores. Addressing human trafficking has been a really bipartisan issue here in this body. I serve as co-chair of the Senate caucus to end human trafficking. I started it a few years ago with Senator Blumenthal. Since we founded the caucus in 2012, we've made real progress, passing a number of bills to end trafficking in government contracting, for instance, reauthorizing the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and just a few weeks ago, we passed a big bill called the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act. We passed it 99-0. 3 bills that I had proposed were part of that package. It's good legislation. As a member of the Finance Committee, I was happy to support a bipartisan amendment to the Trade Promotion Authority that was offered by Senator Menendez. It puts additional teeth into our trafficking enforcement so that countries who are dealing with us in a trade agreement know that we're serious if year after year they turn a blind eye to the horrible reality of human trafficking in their labor markets and in their countries. So the question before us is, do we keep that in this legislation or not? I think we shouldn't water down trafficking protections that have already been adopted by a bipartisan majority of the Finance Committee by a vote of 16-10. I think we should take into account the horrendous human trafficking record of some of the world's worst offenders. And if we do that, we're going to be able to help stop human trafficking globally. If we don't do that, if we water it down, I fear we're giving some of these countries an easy way out, promoting trafficking by letting countries get around the rules. Every year, the State Department issues the Trafficking in Persons Report, TIP, Trafficking in Persons. The report ranks countries. They have different tiers. Tiers 1, that means the country is responsive and proactive to combating human trafficking. To Tier 3, it means the country has failed to take steps to prevent trafficking, and the laws and policies of the country actually promote a market that encourages human trafficking. So that's the State Department. I understand this report, the TIP report, will be released in June, and it's already been substantially drafted. I understand that one of the TPP countries may fall in Category 3, Tier 3. This government continues to detain trafficking victims for periods of time, treating them as criminals for months or even years, we're told. This country does not support the NGOs, the non-governmental groups in the region that provide counseling and rehabilitation for victims. This is from the State Department. And the most egregious trends highlighted by the State Department that this government is now identifying fewer victims and conducting fewer investigations than in recent years. So, should we be concerned about that? Yeah, we should. And I think there's nothing wrong with us including that, to provide that incentive, to provide that leverage in this TPA bill that we're going to vote on early next week. The Trafficking in Persons Office is independent. They aren't swayed by political considerations. That's my sense of it. It's a good office. So I'll have enormous respect for their TIP analysis, and I'll be disappointed if that language is not included in the trade agreement. Again, the Finance Committee, with the support of 5 Republicans, including me, passed this amendment, and I think Senator Menendez's attention to this issue is appropriate. I hope we will stand up, as we did with that 99-0 vote, with regard to the broader legislation. So, Madam President, I thank you for giving me the ability to talk a little about these issues today. I think it's incredibly important that we move forward with expanding trade. And I think Trade Promotion Authority is needed to do that. But as we do it, let's be sure that we're able to look those workers, those farmers, in the eye back home and say, you know what, this is going to work for you too. It's going to work for all of us. This is going to work because we're giving you access to markets you wouldn't otherwise have. That creates more and better paying jobs, but we're also going to be sure that it's a more level playing field, that you're able to compete effectively and win, because the rules won't be rigged against you. The rules are going to be fair for everybody. Thank you, Madam President. I yield back my time.